Good morning again to everyone, and welcome to this morning's session. Session has a very long name, Transforming Your Teaching into Scholarship, an Introduction to the Scholarship of Teaching and Learning, or as we call it, SoTL. I'm your facilitator for today. I'm Mark. Please call me Mark. At any time, if you feel to interject, to share a comment, to share a thought, please unmute. We are happy if you use the actual mic instead of the chat, unless directed to do so. And that is simply because of how we have this set up here at the center, that I'm not necessarily able to see the chat at all times. So begging for your cooperation with that. This morning we have no planned drills, so in the event of a break in transmission, we will simply have to end and reconvene at another time, of course, following advertisement. So we look forward to this morning's session. And now, if you can, in the chat, could you please indicate where you're joining us from? What department, what unit, and so forth. Great. So we're seeing a lot of our colleagues from Roy Tech. Welcome, welcome. Geomatics, Academic Literacies Program. I think that's Modern Languages and Learning. School of Ed, CLL, Chemistry, a whole lot. Agri-Econ and Extension. We are happy to have you all. Management Studies, Life Sciences. Good morning again to everyone. Now, we're going to keep this morning session very, very interactive. A lot of learning takes place, the more interaction that happens fosters actual learning. So we're trying to use this model as we move forward this morning. Now, just before we proceed with the actual content, for those of you who may not be familiar with it, here is the educational philosophy of the campus, or the CEP, the Campus Educational Philosophy. Take a quick read of it. I'm not going to read it. And you can get familiar with it because it's something that you're going to see quite often moving forward.
Mark, I'm not seeing your screen. Okay, I'm not seeing it.
Yes, that was actually purposeful. I was told my head was a little too big and blocking everybody. So I hope it's visible now, especially the bottom left of the screen. Yeah, just confirmation.
Yeah.
Okay, great. So let's move forward. Let's move forward. Why are we here today? Why are we here today? Well, as advertised, we're going to discuss the scholarship of teaching and learning.
We've seen your notes.
And we're going to be focusing on the tenets of scholarly teaching versus the scholarship of teaching and learning. We're going to be looking at the different stages of the scholarship of teaching and learning. It's an actual 5-step process. We're going to be using that 5-step process along with a template provided to be able to leave here with a crafted research plan or a plan of action and implementing scholarship of teaching and learning in your classrooms. And we're really, really hoping that this could begin or be the platform for a community of practitioners or a sort of commons that really focuses on teaching and learning, student learning, and research in that endeavor. Is everyone seeing my screen properly? Just a quick question. Am I still blocking it?
Presentation view. So,
oh, I'm in the wrong one again.
Yes.
All right, seeing the correct one this time? Yes, good.
Yes.
All right, so where does scholarly teaching, scholarship of teaching come about? Where does it start? Why would you define yourself as a scholarly teacher? Anyone dares to comment? Would you refer to yourself as a scholarly teacher? What do you think is a scholarly teacher? Let's just lay the groundwork for it. And again, please, all right, please use the mic. I'm hearing someone clearing their throat, so they're ready. I'm seeing Marsha's hand is up.
Sorry about having that audio open, everybody. A scholarly teacher, I think, is a reflective practitioner. So you look at what's happening, you think about what that practice means for your teaching and for the students' learning. And then the last piece is that reflection gets transmitted into some kind of written format so that you can share your learning. You could share the models that you develop. You could share your action steps and so on. So almost an action learning approach could be used in SoTL as well, so that you contribute to the literature as well, so others could benefit from what you have learned and you use what others have learned in your practice.
Wow, Marsha, that is a lot. That is a whole lot. Thank you so much for getting us started like that. And I appreciate that start. And it actually gives us a good segue into determining the difference between scholarly teaching and the scholarship of teaching and learning. Now, before we go any further, like I said, we're doing things very differently. We know persons are accustomed to a workshop running with a certain flow of events and certain timings for different activities, but we're going to flip things a bit. Well, not traditional flip, but change things around a bit. We're going to, at this point, put you into breakout rooms for about 3 to 5 minutes. And I want you in your rooms to discuss what you think is scholarly teaching. Would you define yourself as a scholarly teacher? And when we come back, each group would have 1 minute each or 2 minutes each just to present what their thoughts are. Is everyone fine with that? We're doing things differently. This topic of a workshop requires a lot of interaction. So we're starting it off with a bang. So 3 to 5 minutes in your groups, you're discussing what is scholarly teaching. Am I a scholarly teacher? And then when we come back, we'll get to present. So do we have the rooms?
Yes, Mark, is 4 groups okay for you? We have,
Sure.
yeah, okay. You want to just repeat the instructions while they go into the room?
So before you join, just remember, what is scholarly teaching? Are you a scholarly teacher? And you come back 2 minutes to present on.
Okay.
It's good to have everyone back this morning after the breakout rooms. We hope it was a productive session.
That was
And
very short.
very short, purposely. Purposely. Now, let me see if I can just get a list of the rooms. So we could go with group 1 quite quickly. Judy, Callum, Natalia, Shara. What would you say is scholarly teaching? Are you defining yourself as a scholarly teacher? Group 1.
Yes, hello everybody. Yes, so we were speaking about the topic. It was very interesting because we have different opinions. So, but we were agreed that it's a reflective process. So when the teacher so the teacher has certain approaches, but sometimes it's like, okay, we know about those approaches, those methods, but we know the theoretical. Yes, the theoretical, but sometimes we don't apply those in the classrooms. So it's more about that, about the research process as well, and how we can include those research process in the classroom as well, or with our students.
Okay, thank you for that, Natalia. Thank you very much for that.
Okay, thank you.
Did anyone in the group think of themselves as a scholarly teacher? Let's hear from room 2. Carlos, Marcia, Inez, Patrice, Patricia.
Hi, good morning.
Good morning. Think whoever just spoke muted themselves. Okay, so anyone from group 2, Carlos, Marcia, Inez, Patrice, Patricia.
We had a few different views. So one view was that the scholarly teacher teaches with constant reflection on whether the students are learning and how they are learning. So they are given the opportunity to go find methods, to go learn, come up with their own methods and so on, so that they get to the learning outcomes. So reflection was an element that came up from one person, letting them go and research and find their approaches was another part. And a third person said, I think that the teacher is always reflecting on whether the learning process is working well to their stated outcomes. So those were the things that came up from our group, if my memory serves right. I'm seeing Inez's hand up, and maybe she has part to add.
Thank you for that, Marcia. I say Inez.
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Can you hear me?
Loud and clear.
All right, my apologies. I really want to apologize because I'm actually on the field today in a school. So it's really difficult for me to capture everything that's
That's
being
no
said.
problem.
I
That's no
saw
problem.
it's being recorded and I'm
Mhm.
hoping to be able to access that afterwards.
Yes, it will be on our YouTube channel.
Oh, so I have to go to YouTube channel to get it. All right, I thought
Yes.
you were sending it to us.
We
Lord
could,
Father,
we
give
will.
me grace. Yes, that would be very much appreciated.
No
Right,
problem.
so I
Inez.
am kind of in and out because I'm not
Mhm.
hearing everything properly.
Okay, understood. All
All
right,
right,
thank
thank you
you
very
for
much.
that.
Yes.
Thank you, group 2. So let's hear from group 3. Afia, Amina, Elna, Patria, Shiho.
Okay, good morning, colleagues.
Good morning.
In our group, we had similar discussions. I think what came out is that we're not relying on our own ideas for teaching. We're constantly seeking experts, other persons' viewpoints and how we approach, how we teach, an effort to be better teachers. Well, I responded, I must call the teacher because I teach organic chemistry, which is extremely challenging worldwide. And so we have to be constantly finding new ways to reach our students. So yes, most of us are solid teachers.
I like that. Thank you for that, Patria. Thank you for that. Now let's hear from room 4. Earl, Nicole, Pauline, Zitas.
Yeah, we talked about scholarly teaching being teaching based on evidence. reflection and sort of a cyclical in a continual improvement. That the scholarly teacher is a reflective practitioner. And we were just about talking about the need for the collection of data and to make their research based on evidence so that the improvement is continuously based on evidence when we came back to the room.
Well, sure. Thank you so much for that. So now, overall, you would agree that everyone is saying that it starts with reflective practice. And of course, we could agree on this. It must start with reflective practice. What am I doing? What has happened? If something has changed, so what? Does it really make a difference? And now what am I going to do because of the change? So let's go and see just a few of the grounding principles and theory behind the idea of scholarship of teaching and learning versus scholarly teaching. And I'm so happy that you all elucidated in such detail your views on it and even your position on being scholarly teachers. So Ernest Boyer in the 90s, you may have heard of him. He's an American educator. I think he became a congressman later on. In his book, Scholarship Reconsidered, and then he followed it up with a report on scholarship. I think it was an application. I could be wrong on the name of that report. But he was arguing in the 90s that generally, and we could agree with this, that universities always position traditional research way higher than teaching importance. We know that some universities such as this are traditionally research universities. Now, Boyer was saying that what we need to do is to realize that there is research in teaching and learning that is separate from research in a subject matter. And he was positioning that research in teaching and learning could be as substantial as traditional research. So he wanted to change the status of the scholarship of teaching and learning, so to speak. Now, his impetus is at the point in time to focus on increasing the quality of student learning. And I want us to keep that term in mind as we move forward this morning. All of this, while we reflect on ourselves and we see how we could improve, is really in essence to increase the quality of student learning. So Boyer came up with these 4 types of scholarship: scholarship of discovery, integration, application, and teaching. And that 4th one, teaching, is where we are this morning. He says teaching is not just a transmission of knowledge, but he was viewing it as a scholarly act of transforming and extending the process of transmitting knowledge. Now, Boyer was not alone. In the 90s, was Boyer pushing the fight by himself. In the 80s, different theorists also proposed that things such as teaching artifacts, syllabi, and so forth could have been considered scholarly output. So Boyer was not working alone, and he was not the first in trying to advance a concretized scholarship of teaching and learning that is recognized as traditional or as significantly as traditional research. So along with Boyer was another theorist, Lee Shulman. Now, Lee Shulman, many of you would be familiar with that name, introduced this concept of what we call PCK, pedagogical content knowledge. Could anyone, feel free, unmute, tell us what you think, despite what you're seeing on the screen. What are your thoughts when you hear the words pedagogical content knowledge? Because Schulman is saying that this is one of the bases of the scholarship of teaching and learning. What are your thoughts? Anyone? Unmute, jump in. What are your thoughts? Pedagogical content knowledge.
So Mark, are you for me when I hear this terminology, I think about the know-how with regard, well, the know-how in terms of how to teach a specific topic, right? So like the best practice in how to teach a certain concept or topic, you know? So I think about PCK in that way.
Mhm. Thanks for that, Javid.
Mhm.
Getting a chance to look at the chat. Judy is saying that its methods appropriate to the content.
Yeah.
So, in short, breaking it into the everyday man's terms, Lee Schulman is saying that there's a big difference between being able to teach, or what people might define as a good teacher. He walks in the class, he's always joyous, he's able to get people to interact. And then having somebody who's a subject matter expert, that this man come what may, or Dr. Facey could teach the living daylights out of chemistry, every concept. What Schulman is saying is that we're taking the ability to teach and the content, and we are now becoming able to teach specifically this content in a way that students can learn it to the best of their ability. So remember, we started at the outset that we're focusing on how student learning is impacted positively. So this is not just about being able to teach. This is not just about being able to teach the content, being able to know the content. This is about knowing how best to teach that content that students best learn. So Schulman says that this is the combination, the synthesis that enables effective teaching. And the goal of SoTL aligns with PCK. Because when we strive to master teaching a certain content in the best way possible for student learning to take place, then we begin to analyze how things are done. Or as you all said, we begin to reflect. So we do what is that concept of systematic inquiry. Now, when a lot of us hear the word inquiry, we might think, ask questions. But inquiry could go deeper than just asking questions. And that's why the word systematic is here. So it becomes a question, yes, but I'm trying to find a solution with evidence. And I think Dr. Roberts' group brought that forth, that you have to have evidence for SoTL to work. So just to recap, we got the idea of Boyer. He's fighting for this thing called SoTL to be as recognized as traditional research. Schulman then says that, hey, there's a thing called PCK. It's not just about teaching and being a good chemist or a good economist. It's about being able to know how to teach the econ in a way that the student's going to best learn. And then we came up with these different definitions of scholarship of teaching and learning. So it's a synthesis of teaching, learning, and research that brings a scholarly lens to learning. Another definition, it's inquiry focused on student learning, again, student learning, methodologically sound, that's a tongue twister, and involves going public. So we get into two things highlighted again, student learning, evidence, student learning and evidence. So if we were to pull it together now, what is SoTL? Well, here we have three theorists, Nancy Chick, Peter Felton, Thomas Hatch. Take a couple seconds, have a read. So in sum, Nancy is saying that we're coming back to this synthesis of teaching and learning driven by curiosity, inquiry, but rigor. So it's as if we're taking the lens off of the subject and putting it the learning process. Felton is saying, again, we're focusing not so much on what I know you know, but I'm going to focus on what the students are coming to know and what works best. What is the evidence to suggest that in different contexts, learning is taking place? Hatch suggests, along the same lines, that this is not a hit and miss concept. We are looking for evidence that could be improved in practice, and again, focusing on student learning. Now, Hatch introduces an interesting thought here. He says others must be able to critique it, build on it, and contribute to the wider teaching commons. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, Dr. Nathai Balkisun at the outset, when she defined or gave her thoughts on scholarly teaching, she mentioned that it must be made public. There must be the evidence and the write-up and the rigor that would allow it to become available to the public. And that is, in essence, a huge landmark of the scholarship of teaching and learning. It is not just your own personal improvement project. This is not just, okay, how do I do this better? This is about, how do I do this better? How have I proven that it is better? And now how could somebody else generalize what I have found and use it to make their practice better? So again, those words, systematic inquiry about student learning, informed by scholarship, and your landmark, going public with the results. So just to recap, quick knowledge check. Anyone feel free to mute and unmute. What is good, subtle, focused on? What is good, subtle, focused on? Fill in the blank. Quick knowledge check. Dr. Balkisun.
Improving our knowledge and experience so that we could bring better learning outcomes to our students.
Good. Thanks for that. Any other ideas, thoughts? Good, subtle is inquiry focused on
Reflection.
reflection. Okay. Judy is saying documented methods used to improve learning. So if we were to take those three things, put them all together, and then refine it, good, subtle is inquiry focused on student learning. So the inquiry would accommodate what Dr. Nathai Balkisun said about looking at our own practice. And it would also accommodate Dr. Roberts' reflective practice. But the focus, the scholarly lens, is really on the student learning. And thanks for that, Natalia. So it's on the student learning. And that is where the difference now exists. Scholarly teaching versus subtle. So scholarly teaching is about you. This is your, your personal improvement, as we said, your personal improvement project. Subtle is about producing scholarship, about teaching and sharing it publicly for peer review and use by others. Quick question. Why do you think the peer review process is integral to subtle, to making it not just scholarly, but to make it scholarship? Why do you think scholarship must have peer review? Anyone?
I think because there'll always be experts in the field who know more than you do.
Mm-hmm.
And not only that, everyone has their own experiences across cultures, across, different settings. And it's always good to know that, people can all agree on what remains there as, published, peer-reviewed material.
Yeah, thanks for that. In the chat, Marsha says, to ensure we are publishing what's changing, what's new to enhance the practice of teaching. Sadi says, strategies and learning abilities keep changing. Yeah, so it's about keeping abreast. Now, how could we, or Carlos says, to add credibility? And that, Carlos, thank you for adding that, is where the rigor comes in. So this is not something that is just our own personal belief. This is something that we could prove works, and others now can recognize that it works after the process of peer review. So in the chat, if you had, let's say, 1 hour break right now, and you're hungry, what would be your most favorite dish that you would go find right now? Quickly, in the chat. What would be your most desired dish at this moment? Cheese sandwich, bacon shack, high protein, cheesecake. Whoa, Petria. Kellen says pizza. Pilau. I'll join you around on that. Nisha says Chinese. Oh my goodness, Masha. All right. So, ooh. And the chat shows just how well blended our society is. But thanks so much for the contribution. So let's think of that last one. Judy says roti. Is a good roti easy to find? I'm sure everybody would say no. But here's this. How could we use roti to emphasize what is the difference between scholarly teaching and SoTL? Sometimes you might be at home making curry and you realize perhaps you were using a different method of, let's say, you burn the curry and then you saw that somebody else, before they burn the curry, they put in garlic, perhaps some meaty, some jeera into the oil first. Oh, yes. My wife's curry is the best. Thank you for that. We expect that by next week. We look forward to that, providing it for the entire group. So you've realized that somebody else is burning the garlic in the oil, perhaps some meaty, and then they're turning the curry. Then they're coming up. You might realize somebody does not use coconut milk, while somebody else uses, while you might use. And then you probably go online. And we're being very selective on the channel that we're going to search. We've seen utmost fails in curry. So we're looking for something that could guide us in making what we think is a good curry. But you see, at that point in time, all we are doing is focusing on how I could make my curry better. Scholarship of teaching and learning now comes when you have tested the different methods of making the curry. And then you now document your recipe and you make it public for the other chefs to try. And when the other chefs have tried it and can validate it, now you have created knowledge instead of just being on YouTube channels looking at how to make curry and consuming knowledge for yourself. And that is where the difference lies between scholarly teaching and SoTL. So I like that point, Zita. Peer review is to ensure the rigor in methods and analysis, and the results and to ensure that they are valid. And if they are not valid or not generalizable, then we're still at the stage of personal improvement project or simply scholarly teaching. Does everybody understand that? Could you give me a quick presence check in the chat? 1, if you understand it, 2, if you don't, before we move forward. Judy, that was supposed to be a 1. All right, good. So Karen says the constructivist approach contributes towards new knowledge and ideas. Thanks for that platform as well. All right, good. So we're all on the same page. So to summarize the difference now, quick matrix. Look at it from the purpose, the activity, and the product of the two fields that we're looking at. So scholarly teaching, purpose, affect the activity of teaching and the resultant learning. Scholarship says we are going to contribute to the knowledge base. Let's look at the activity first for the two. Scholarly teaching, consuming. So we're reviewing goals, reading articles, collecting data for self-improvement. So how is my curry going to improve? The difference again, scholarship says, I'm now going to ask questions about the improvement of the curry. And I'm going to do this systematically, providing evidence. The product, scholarly says, we end with observation, analysis, and documentation. We might share it with peers, but here's the difference with scholarship. It is formally communicated, peer-reviewed, and made public. And you see, this is where the man Boyer has to smile, because when it becomes formally communicated, peer-reviewed, and made public, is where it becomes validated. Where we are now in 2025, scholarship of teaching and learning is as accepted as traditional research. And this is the goal that Boyer had in the 90s. So before we move forward, feel free, take a 2-minute break, check your messages, catch up, and we will convene in 2 minutes. Good, and we are back. Everyone's caught up with the messages. Right, so I'm just checking back the chat. Patria says she was thinking that subtle feeds into or provides tools for scholarly. Thank you so very much for that, Patria. Do you mind rather simply unmuting and explaining it a little further? I mean, it's crystal clear, but just for emphasis.
I was reviewing the table and realized that for us to, I guess, have access to more tools and help with scholarly teaching, somebody has to be doing scholarship of teaching and learning, that we're able to contribute to other people being able to improve their teaching. So it's important for us to focus on the scholarship of teaching and learning.
Thank you so much for that, Patria. Because if we do not contribute, then there would be less and less scholarly teaching that could get to SoTL, that could get to the stage of SoTL. Now, let's go through some of the benefits. We said that this is one of the things we're going to discuss today. How do you see scholarship of teaching and learning as benefiting? And I'm going to ask this from two angles. I want you to comment on it. How do you see it as benefiting you as the lecturer? And how do you see it as benefiting your department or your institute? How do you think scholarship of teaching and learning benefits you personally and the department or institute? Think about it. Think about it. And then unmute and share. Right, so Karen says it could enhance his teaching practice, right? Specifically, what part of your teaching practice would you say, Karen?
Hi, morning.
Good morning.
So I was thinking that it would encourage me to approach teaching with the same rigor as, let's say, disciplinary research, using data reflection and inquiry that could improve my methods.
Yeah. Thank you so much for that. That is an absolutely on the point description of one of the main benefits of scholarship of teaching and learning. Anyone else? Dr. Roberts?
Yeah, I think it would build, in terms of the department, it would build a culture of collaboration, because members would be able to share insights and to basically to grow professionally, I think, if
Mhm.
there's a shared scholarly conversation.
Oh, I like that ending, scholarly conversation. Thanks so much for that, Dr. Roberts. Anyone else? Any other thoughts, opinions? What do you think, or how does scholarship of teaching and learning SoTL benefit you individually and a department or institution? Well, let's look at what Karen suggested. Karen is saying that he's going to improve his practice. This is Karen here, and he's going to move forward to improving his practice. I know, quite frankly, Karen, the graphic aligns perfectly with what you said about approaching your teaching practice with the same rigor of traditional research, that you're going in not just to teach. So this is not routine delivery, go in, deliver, good morning class, blah, 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 and that's it. This is not that. Scholarship of teaching and learning says that I'm going in with this lens in my back pocket to now zoom in on the student learning. So I'm looking at different things as ideas, activities and resources, how collaboration is being done in the classroom, is feedback being given, all of the different parts of the curry that create the perfect curry. And then remember, I must publicize. So as a person, so thanks again, Karen, in the chat. I believe it incorporates a higher level of evidence-based decision-making within departments. So for the institutional benefit now, as Dr. Roberts said, we're going to end up with a whole lot more scholarly conversations. When you have scholarly conversations, you realize that you have new ideas. And being scholarly, remember, means that you're consuming the scholarship that's already out there. So what you're going to do is you're probably going to realize that Dr. Facey in chemistry is doing something that could help you, although you are teaching perhaps French. And that moves us to allow for collaboration. So a remarkable thing about SoTL is that SoTL allows for interdisciplinary practice. This is not something that means if I teach chemistry, I could only work or approach with a scholarly lens into the teaching of chemistry. This means that I could team up with anyone who is also interested in SoTL, because what are we focused on? The student learning, Of course, we may not be able to speak at length in the published article because of the concept of the PCK. So if we're talking about French, well, then Dr. Roberts will have to talk about that part. But if we're talking about the actual method and how it worked, guess what? That's where Dr. Facey could come in and elaborate. So are we seeing another benefit of SoTL as also not just being able to have the conversations, but to allow for interdisciplinary work, and of course to improve the publication profile of the university? So everyone clear on those two benefits. We improve our practice because we are moving rigorously, and we improve the conversation, which allows for collaboration and multidisciplinary or interdisciplinary work. Thanks for that. Dr. Nathai Barkison says it raises the institution's reputation due to proven high standards and output quality. So quick knowledge check. What is a main benefit of engaging in SoTL? Not being aware of it. What is a main benefit? Of course, there are several. What do you think would be a main benefit to you? To you. Karen, you have already commented, but now that we've discussed it, what do you think could be the benefit to you?
I think teaching becomes easier
Mm,
because it's based on what's been tried, practiced, what's been validated, and students become more responsive, and so I believe it will be a lot easier.
Thanks so much for that, Dr. Ibrahim Ali. Karen says enhance professional identity and scholarly reputation. And I agree with both statements. Teaching becomes easier, but you know what? Just as in the graphic, it wasn't just that open the door, close the door cycle of routine delivery. While it becomes easier, it becomes more meaningful. And when something becomes more meaningful, we begin to enjoy it. Teaching feels more alive. Thank you. We don't keep doing the same thing over and over, the same one. Confident practitioner. Now, think again. Personalize the question. How does SoTL now, how do you see SoTL benefiting this institution or specifically your department? So think of it honestly. Think of it honestly. Any ideas? Is anyone seeing how SoTL could feed into the improvement of their department? If so, all right, so Karen says it's going to build a culture of continuous improvement. Good. Marcia says the identity as a department changes, we become leaders, leading a charge for improvement and inquiry. Stepping up our practice. Best practice for teaching. Wonderful, wonderful. So we're seeing that sometimes SoTL could be a missed opportunity in producing research, meaningful evidence, or rigorous output. Now, you might be thinking, thanks for that, Jav, it's increasing the whole product of teaching and learning. You might be thinking, okay, so we understand what's the difference between SoTL and scholarly teaching. We kind of have an idea of how institutional benefits differ from personal benefits, but still they are benefits one and the same. And we keep in with the concept of that perfect curry, Earl's wife's perfect curry. Where does Earl's wife start? So what we're going to do, we're going to go through this 5-stage process of SoTL. Quite similar to traditional research, SoTL begins with identifying a question or identifying a problem. So this is where, as you have all said, the reflective practice becomes the foundation. So I begin critiquing what I have done, deliberately critiquing what I have done to identify what's going wrong or what's going good. So if we are putting the lens, and I'm going back to what we said in the earlies, if the focus or the imperative of SoTL is on student learning, you know what? The good part is that I could look for where did learning take place and where did it not take place. And either of these could give me a start to SoTL. Either of those. What went well? What didn't work well? So you'd have got the message yesterday to think of a success story or a pain point. And while we're discussing this, I want you to recall whatever you've made note of when you got that message yesterday, because we're going to use it in the next activity. After we have identified what is the gap or what went well, we're now going to consume. So we're going to look at the other YouTube channels. So we consult the literature in step 2. What have other persons done? The good thing about SoTL is that because it is open, honest self-reflection, we are able to say what did not work well. So if someone has already found that perhaps having the weighting of my assessments has been a problem for the students, I could think that, okay, if this person is identifying that, then I know something that I need to avoid or to reallocate as identified that by that person. So I've identified my problem. I have found literature that could help me make an adjustment. And I am finding this literature in the same peer-reviewed journals that exist on Google Scholar and all of the different databases. So you have the journal for teaching science, you have journals for chemical education, and we're going to get into that a little later. After I've identified the literature, I'm now going to seek ethics approval. Quick question, why do you think we need ethics approval? Why would we need ethics approval? Anyone? Why would we need ethics approval? Any thoughts? Remember, please don't use the chat. Please feel free to unmute. We're going to begin subtle. Why do I need approval from the ethics committee? What do you think?
I think I'll try it.
Sure.
I think because SoTL is rooted in teaching practice, it does involve human participants and systematic inquiry. So in this case, you know, where we talk about students and their learning experiences, so I think we would need ethical approval because they are involved and they need to understand why they're involved in this practice, right? We don't want to gather information from them without them knowing why we're gathering that information and what we're going to do with it.
Excellent. Thanks so much for that, Karen. So, you know, when you think of it, as Karen said, suppose our research or SoTL is going to go to the extent of taking note in collecting data. We're taking note of what categories of engagement exist within a classroom in a given activity. And you might decide, I'm going to put my camera, my phone on a tripod and record. That's data collection, but that is humans that you're recording. Anytime that we're doing research with humans and anything around SoTL, by and large, we're going to need ethical approval. And of course, having the approval of the committee also gives validation to what we're already planning to do. So if it's something that, let's say, is focused on like a program quality assurance or something like that, and it's an inquiry with that as the aim, it may not need the approval, but once it's going to be published, once it's becoming scholarship, then we could see how the ethics approval is necessary. So of course, after we do that, after we do, you know, that lovely, what's the name of the course from the ethics committee that we have, when we complete it, then we could set out now and collecting data. So we begin to ascertain what type of data we're going to need. And the last stage, we publicize our work in the peer-reviewed journal that we mentioned. So let's go back a bit to stage one. So we're looking at questions falling into 4 of these categories. What worked? What went well? What does it look like? So what did it take out of me? What occurred when it went well? What did the students do? What did I do? What could be? So if there was a gap, or even if I have improved student learning, I may have come across a new evidence or scholarship article, scholarly article, that suggests there's still room for improvement. What's underneath? What is the underlying basis behind students having, in my course, having high failure rates? Now, could anyone think of, in their own context, in their own classroom, of a problem or a question quickly that aligns with any of these 4 categories? Thanks for that input in the chat as well, Dr. Ibrahim Ali. That's a lovely experience. So in your own context, think of a problem, a question. Dr. Nathai Balpisun.
This one is coming up a lot for me, for my peers as well. And that is, 10 years ago, we talked about the digital generation. is a whole different phenomenon we see now, in that the interaction in class is so changed. I have children sitting there, if they come to class anymore, and texting through the class, that kind of thing. They have shorter attention spans because we're in the 30-second reel generation. So what are the attitudes? How are they showing up in unwillingness or inability to read an extensive amount or research an extensive amount, and their dedication to doing the hard work for long periods? And how does that change the way we teach? Because I put a lot of entertainment into my teaching now in order to pull people in, and I get better responses, but it takes a whole lot because you have to learn new methods.
That is great to hear, and I hope it's something that we could read about in the near future. I really hope so, but thanks so much for that input. And so while Dr. Nathai Barkison is speaking, I want you to think about, again, what is going on in your own kitchen with that pot on the fire? What is happening in your context? What are the changes you've seen? What have you done? Where do you think you could still improve? What went well? What didn't go too well? You're getting the idea of how much effort goes into really knowing what we are going to do. Karen says what works for him is using scenarios, either socially or workplace related, where participants easily relate to them for food or social. Always, always. So connecting strategy and competitive advantage to doubles vendor. Lovely. So hopefully the career analogy sits well. So identifying the problem, we're taking it step by step. So an example would be, how did a new case study activity that I introduced in this semester impact test scores? I want you to realize in this statement, you have now moved from a problem to a question, a specific question. How did a case study impact test scores? So as Dr. Nathai Barkison said earlier, she has introduced a lot of entertainment. How could we measure the impact of it? We have a question. So that is something that we think worked. We think it's making a change, but we need to make it scholarship. We're moving on and we get back to it. Let's look at what does it look like. So how are students engaging with the case study activity? Perhaps it's something, let's say, or a discussion forum in My Learning. Could I go back into the data that's collected in My Learning and see the time spent in the activity, how often the student was there, how many students engaged with it? You're getting the idea that we're moving from this overarching problem and realize that this is the same process in traditional research, and we're drilling down now to the questions. Once we have the questions, we could go to the next step. So we're continuing. What could be? What are the unmet goals or the gaps that we think still exist? How could I address them? And as we said earlier, what's the underneath? What's the basis of it? What's the framework that I'm probably omitting to consider that could shape my practice? So a quick infographic, again, to get your creative thinking going. Identifying the problem, identifying a question that could be measured. Step 2, we conduct the literature review, as we said, and here are just some of the journals available. Of course, this is just a pure drop in the barrel on the databases of SoTL journals. Note, please, the third one, the Caribbean Teaching Scholar, which is the SETL's peer-reviewed journal. And I know that we do have some contributors and editors here with us today. And we appreciate your hard work, but we want to emphasize that this too is an output for scholarly, rigorous, student learning focused research. So step 3, we talked about research ethics. Karen spoke about respecting persons because it's human participants. We want to make sure that everybody is treated fairly and equitably. The basics of upholding privacy. So perhaps I've seen video evidence of scholarship of teaching and learning. And what some educators have done is that they have used recorded parts of a class, but what they have done is blurred out the faces of the students. So things like that we have to consider when we are applying for research ethic approval as well. Now, how does stage 4 get defined? How would I know? We have 3 approaches to collecting data and doing analysis. How would I know? Could somebody please share? If I am should use quantitative methods, qualitative methods, or mixed methods? What would dictate me choosing these? One of these, or both?
Maybe your research questions.
Research question. So could someone follow up? Give an example of a research question, and then we would see what it would dictate that we choose.
If you want to know how often students engage with a particular task on my e-learning, let's say, that would probably be something quantitative.
Great, great. Thanks for that. So that's definitely something numeric. Karen says mixed methods, more holistic, based on research question. Review other researchers' approaches by reviewing the literature. Great. So we get any idea that we have to have a guide before we just go into the data gathering, collection, and analysis process. So we might find that Javid's wife also makes a good curry, as did Earl's wife. And Earl's wife might find Javid's wife's stuff out there, publicized. And she decides to tweak hers a bit. And she decides that, you know what, perhaps she's using 1/4 teaspoon of masala too much, according to Javid's wife. And as Dr. Nathai Balkison is saying, this is where we could have an idea of specifics as we drill along into SoTL. So Dr. Ibrahim Ali said, if I want to know levels of engagement in my SoTL work, I define what are levels of engagement. I specifically, as the researcher and practitioner, would say that I am looking at quantity of time spent, because I could look at engagement as the quality of the time spent. Now, when it becomes the quantity, as she said, we could go into my learning and see what the data says. Dr. Nathai Balkison earlier says she wants to know the impact of introducing entertainment on test scores. Is that qualitative or quantitative? It's obviously quantitative, because the test score is something numerical. And of course, we could think of, if we need to use a survey for the students, it's something like its scale. You're going to look at quantitative methods. Qualitative methods come up now when we begin to think of the whys. So we're not measuring anymore. We're measured with the quantitative, but we're trying to figure out reasons behind things. We need to ask, perhaps in a smaller group, what we call a focus group, specific questions that get to the underlying reason for an occurrence in the classroom. And that is now where qualitative methods could come in. Is it an interview? Is it a focus group? But what if now I could perhaps combine the two? And that is where Karen's statement earlier comes in. So he says that it is more holistic using mixed methods. And that's so true, because mixed methods produce very, very deep findings. Is that? Okay, that was by accident. And Karen is also asking, how does flipped classroom design impact? Good, good. So that's a good way, again, Karen, of defining in your question, letting your question define what you're going to use. What you're going to use. So attitudes, beliefs, lovely. Javed says, link to sampling method and data collection strategy. So the strategy is being guided by the question. So remember, we have the problem, big thing. We want to get down to the specific thing that we're trying to fix. And that specific thing is going to denote what is needed. Everybody get any idea? 1 for yes, 0 for no? 1 for yes, 0 for no? Yeah, good. So remember, you're realizing right now that this thing is just as rigorous as traditional research. It's the same stages. So numerical data such as grades, survey responses, as we said, we know that's quantitative. Interviews, focus groups, observations, qualitative. Mixed methods, we simply combine the two. So we might look at the test scores, but then we could also use a focus group on observation to see what engagement looks like versus quantity of time on my learning. Nice. And of course, the fifth step, we share our findings. And how do we share the findings? Main one would be peer-reviewed journals. That's the one that we know is peer-reviewed. It's rigorous. There's enough work that goes into that to ensure that the findings are generalizable and valid. And that is what puts Boyer's goal of SoTL on the same stage with traditional research. It could also be presented at academic conferences, the findings at department meetings, and institutional events. And I purposely use this picture in the backdrop here because this is one of the SoTL's annual events. This is a snapshot from, I think it was this year's 2025 Faculty Cafe. The Faculty Cafe, as hosted by the SoTL, is presented generally in April. It's a half-day event where practitioners, scholars, scholarly teachers get the chance to come in a very unconference setting, meaning that it allows you, the practitioner, to be the lead of the conference. We are not the ones taking the charge. And we do it in a speed dating format. So we have about 6 different tables or 6 round tables where the participants could rotate after each one is presented. So let's say 15 minutes for presentation, you switch and you go to the next. And what it allows is for those 6 applicants who are now presenting at the Faculty Cafe, they are presenting what they have found worked well, did not work well, where student learning took place or where it did not take place, and what accounted for it, and present the case of perhaps this is something that you could now try. Now, in some cases, what has been presented has actually already become scholarship, because we have had cases where persons have collaborated with us and we have output as peer-reviewed journal articles. So I could think of one that was recently done on using self-determination theory to explain motivation levels. What drives, so the problem was there was low engagement within certain age groups. And you wanted to know why the older audience was so engaged. And we used the principle of self-determination theory to account for what could be the differences. And then the data was drawn from qualitative responses. So of course, coding, themes, and that kind of exploration. This is something that I know some of you have attended already, and we invite you, look out for it. It's coming up next year in April. Look out for it, register early, because it's an opportunity for you to engage in that SoTL commons concept framework of, or more affectionately called the Faculty Cafe at our campus. Yeah. So again, we're gonna pause 2 minutes, check your messages, take a walk, buy a break, whatever it might be. And we'll be back in 2 minutes at 11:20. Right. Good. So hope everybody's ready. We've caught up so far for the morning on what is the main difference between scholarly teaching and scholarship of teaching and learning. We've also discussed the individual as well as the more macro benefits, so the departmental benefits, the institutional benefits of engaging in SoTL. We have discussed the 5-step stage in the SoTL process of having a problem that becomes a question, then finding literature, ethics approval, data gathering and analysis, and publication. What we're going to do now is engage in a very meaningful activity with the same groups that we have had earlier. And it is our intention that the group is chaotic, for want of a better word, simply meaning that not everybody knows everyone and that not everyone is from the same field. And we hope that it could become really something interdisciplinary as we move forward. So in your breakout rooms, you're going to use the template that's going to be provided in the chat, which is something that we've created to begin a SoTL project or to make headway into a SoTL project. Now that template is going to have specific questions to get you thinking, specific instructions that we hope are as clear as possible. Use the template, think both holistically and specifically about your own classrooms, about something that you are trying, something that you would like to try, something that you have tried, something that you've changed. Think about that success story that we asked you to take note of yesterday. The success story or the pain point. And I want you to feel as liberal to discuss it with each other in your groups. Use that as the foundation for charting your SoTL project. Remember, the aim of this is that we become a community of practitioners, or a SoTL commons, so to speak. So it's 11:23, and we're going to give this activity 20 minutes. All right, so in your groups, use the template that Javed has just placed into the chat. You could download it quickly. In your groups, using that template, begin collaborating, brainstorming, going through the process or earmarking phases of that process specific to your classroom for your student learning. Everyone clear on that? 1 in the chat or 0? This is very key to the purpose of this morning, right? Earl?
Mark, some clarity. Are we are we working on one person's classroom or individual classrooms?
So what we have realized in the past is that not everybody is too liberal. So if somebody is willing to volunteer, use that one case for the group. But of course, while you are doing that, think about your own.
Okay,
so each group is generally going to present one case, one question, and as you would see in the guide that Javed provided, right?
Okay, thank you.
Great. So we are now going to go into the breakout rooms. We'll see you back in 20 minutes and we will be joining throughout the session. We'll be joining through rooms. All right, Karen, we'll address that 1 sec.
Hi, Yvonne.
Hello.
We are back.
That's the
And
fastest 20 minutes in my life.
Fastest 20 minutes in your life. And I actually had to check it on my phone. And that was actually 22 minutes. That was actually 20. But you get the idea of scholarship of teaching and learning not being this vai, as we would say in Trinidad, fly-by-night concept. The time and effort it takes is the same as traditional research. So I saw some interesting things as I moved from the groups. I apologize for not being able to equally distribute my time or our time. But let's hear from group 1. How far did you reach? Tell us what was the experience like. Afia, Judy, Kellon, Karen, Yvonne.
Well, I guess they volunteered me there. It was a good discussion in terms of, you know, sharing some ideas, where something that I think we all go through as facilitators and educators, thinking about student engagement and critical thinking and that application towards real world cases. So the problem that we kind of came up with was that engagement and critical thinking may be limited when working with standard exercises, or defined case studies. So the challenge was investigating whether real world cases can encourage or influence, you know, reflective management style. True reflective management style presentations can affect student engagement and critical thinking. All right. So the goal was to enhance the engagement and critical thinking when analyzing real world scenarios. So some of the objectives would be like to increase measurable engagement by 20%, improve their ability to generate actionable insights from exercises, and to encourage reflective thinking. The methodology was a mixed method action research, and it was the quantitative element was assessment of the engagement and critical thinking through the rubric, etc. And also the qualitative was feedback from their reflection. And the action research would have been on a single cohort with comparison baseline from previous cohorts. And like things like ethical consideration, we didn't get time to type it out, but I'm just kind of thinking student data privacy and confidentiality, allowing for like their voluntary participation and feedback or reflections. Trying to avoid like any kind of grading bias due to participation in the intervention. And things like mitigation strategies would be to obtain informed consent and anonymize their reflections, and probably clearly communicate that participation in reflections, and show that it's not going to impact their grades or anything like that, you know? And of course, following the institutional guidelines for ethical research in the educational settings of the institute.
Oh, so you all have already written up to chapter 3.
Yeah, well, we didn't write that part. We were just getting there, but the time ran out. Yeah, but that's pretty much it. Thanks so much to the group. They were really good.
Yes, and I must commend the groups for the amount of collaboration that I heard. And of course, you would realize how much collaboration is really needed, and how collaboration rather makes it easier than just trying to figure out this thing on your own. All right, let's hear from group 2. Carlos, Marsha, Inez, Patrice, Patricia, Sati.
Hi, Mark. So we went with student engagement. The problem being a large class, 70 students. One particular method was used to engage with the students, being Mentimeter. So we're looking at using some different methods of student engagement to see which one is probably preferred between the students. So a possible research question on what are students' perceptions, attitudes towards various methods of engagement. We're looking at a mixed methods research, namely because we want to capture their feelings right after the class and possibly later on asynchronously via a survey or so. So the qualitative part, of course, we get from the interviews and so on just after the class, and the quantitative part we'll get from the surveys. There was a suggestion from the group to use possibly 3 methods, so they can choose amongst the 3. We didn't get past that because the discussion was ongoing, but there will be the ethical challenges, of course, with students recording them, making sure that it's anonymous, making sure they capture their feelings and get their permissions and so on during the survey and that sort of things.
Right.
Thanks to the group for chiming in, because this is actually one of my this is a problem I'm facing right now. So it was actually good to get some feedback from the group, from the ladies. So thank you, ladies.
Thanks so much for sharing that, Carlos. Quick show of hands. Anyone else facing a similar problem? Just raise hand. Thinking of how to address it, along with Carlos, Masha, Karen. Yep. So, although you're not in the same group, when you realize that you're hearing problems, some problems ring or resonate with across the disciplines, across departments, it does not matter. And that's how we're saying SoTL allows for collaboration. SoTL allows for collaboration. Petria, is this a hand from the problem or is this a hand for a comment?
From the problem, I just
From the problem.
share that I can identify.
Yeah, yeah. Group 3, Aaron, Amina, Elna, Petria, Shiho.
Okay, well, I will start. What my group members can chime in what I have forgotten. We have a good discussion going, and we actually share the same problem, so we were able to contribute.
Nice.
So the problem was how do we improve student participation in outreach activities to improve a course satisfaction. So we end up with a research question, basically, to what extent does outreach influence satisfaction in a course, right? So we decided that the goals would be that we want to identify students' perception of outreach activities and key factors that influence or hinder their participation in these activities and how we can improve their involvement in these outreach activities. We decided on a mixed method approach. So we're thinking of having like a pre-semester survey at the beginning of the semester just to gauge their thoughts. And then we would do at the end of the semester a post-semester survey. We'll also do focus groups. And then we're thinking about mid-semester, we could have a message board where students could share their thoughts from the outreach activities, post pictures, and just share how it impacted them. So the idea is how, based on their experience, how can this now improve the course satisfaction? For timeline, we thought of one semester is just one course, so it will be 12 weeks. For the ethical considerations, we said that we can't force them to do it, even though somewhere say we could tie it to their, they can't get their grades until they participate. We can't do that, but we could encourage them to participate. We thought of all persons who are involved in the outreach activity would receive some kind of certificate of participation. So it's something to say that they participated in this activity. Of course, you would need informed consent before they even get involved in this research. Yeah, that's where we went. I'm not sure if I forgot anything else. I guess my team members could chime in.
No, Petra, perfect. Well done. Thank you.
I did, yeah. That's basically what we discussed so far.
Thank you. Congrats. Very good work. So all of you so far. And let's round it off with group 4, Earl, Nicole, Pauline, Roderick. Thank you so much for that, Petria.
Right. So I'm doing it like a testimonial rather than following strictly the template. When we're trying to figure out what to present, I told them I have a stalled action research project. And how Dr. Nicole helped me is in identifying. She says, from your tone, it seems as if the reason why you're not engaged in the project because it's too broad. So I have this outline with about 5 research questions. But after we looked at it, after we reflected on it, it came down to looking at the first research question, because my project is on improving students' attitudes towards mathematics by using a more constructivist, student-centered epistemology. And let me tell you something, SoTL SoTL invited me to present this, and I told them no, I was scared.
I remember.
I was scared. Now, if I met Nicole before, it would have solved my problem, because what I realized is that this project really has three phases. First of all, you have to establish what the problem is. I was approaching and trying to do it in a universal way and doing an intervention, take a group of students and a control group, another control group, using a student-centered approach for one group and the traditional method for one group, which is a very, very big project. It involves other lectures and so on. But Nicole said, why don't you start with identifying first with the first group? Your first group, what is the problem? So the quantitative would be their grades, their prior grades prior to, because this is like a second year class. So they would have come in with their mathematical grades, and then they would have done other little courses, and to track their progression in terms of the trends with each student, and then have a conversation, either a focus group or individual interviews with this group of students to say what are their versions. Now we landed on I was telling a story, an account of somebody by the name of Dr. Raquel Julie, who doesn't teach anymore, incidentally, that I talked to students who she taught, students who move from failing mathematics, who move from average C students, average D students, who became A students in almost everything that they were doing. So when I tried to find out what it is that Dr. Julie did that made you improve, and they said, Dr. Julie taught me how to learn. She taught me, she wasn't just teaching me math, she taught me how to learn. So when I learned how I learned, it helped me in everything I was doing. All my fears, all the fears that they had in various disciplines, not even related to mathematics, they were to identify and they were to learn. So then my group said, I may need now to even speak to Dr. Julie to find out what she did, because it's down the alley. I'm talking about, okay, students have an aversion towards math. And I have living testimonials from students who said that when they were first going to work with her, that they were scared to do mathematics, but they ended up not being not only proficient in mathematics, but better learners. So in a sense, this idea of sharing practice has come home to me in a real way. I have learned, I mean, I owe you all money, this should be free.
Curry. We'll stick with the curry.
And after today, I am going to be eating rice, dal, and curry duck after this session. That's my lunch.
Goodness. You know what? Put your address in the location in the chat so everybody can join you and collaborate.
Right. So that basically is really has shown me well directly the benefit and the joy of sharing. Sometimes we are fearful to share our practice before we might feel we might be good enough, it might be in enough depth, it might not be scholastic, whatever it is. But I've learned this morning about that. Just simply sharing, and just by having a conversation with Dr. Roberts, where she said, from when my hesitance, my tone, my camera wasn't on, but my body language, through my tone, through the non-verbal, she was able to identify that I was fearful, and the fear came from lack of clarity. So that's my contribution. So I didn't stick to your template and all of that.
Not a problem being rogue. Some real learning happened there. And thank you also very much for that. I actually took note, and when I was moving through the group, of that statement. All I heard was she taught students to learn how to learn. You see, the thing with SoTL is that when we engage in SoTL, and the students are aware of it, the students become what we call in SoTL our co-researchers, which is the same as in traditional research. But you see, when students realize their role as co-researchers, they automatically, according to the literature, become so much more engaged in the process of the SoTL that by extension, they become more attuned to learning and seeing how things impact them and their learning. Remember, that is what we said is the focus of SoTL, putting the lens on student learning. So I hope you all enjoyed this session. And now this session was not just meant to meet new faces. The point of this session is that you are seeing the need to address certain thoughts, ideas you might have in your head. Remember, it's not always an actual problem, Sometimes you can do scholarship into what is going well. What is going well. But what we want to make sure is that we take today, which could be kind of like scholarly teaching, and we translate that to scholarship of teaching and learning. So we've got some literature from experiences and those kind of things. We've seen how we need to collaborate. We've got good suggestions. Please do not let those relationships come to naught. We're encouraging you, even as a group, if you could stick with the group, why not challenge yourself to push in that very question into a publication, even if it has 4 authors? That's what we're looking at accomplishing, adding to the body of knowledge that exists to impact student learning. It doesn't matter if you're from Roytech, if you're from maths, if you're from languages, you yourself in the 20 minutes have seen what SoTL does just in 20 minutes when we collaborate. So thank you so much for being here. I think we have addressed the differences between scholarly teaching and SoTL. We have addressed the benefits, institutional and personal. We have looked at the stage of the process, and we have been able to identify starting points and a little further into the actual SoTL process in our own context. Please keep in touch with us. We are here to help. You have ideas, you are thinking of writing something or doing research on something in teaching and learning, we are here to help. Shoot me an email if you think you need some assistance in bringing it to fruition. If you want help perhaps with writing up the literature section, if you want to know what are the underpinning models and those kinds of things, please reach out. We already have with us some published authors from our journal, and they could share their experience with you informally. We are here to help. Keep that in mind, folks. So follow us on YouTube, Instagram, Twitter, well, X, TikTok. Look out for our announcements. We're going to have upcoming activities. We want, please, to keep in touch. Remember my email, marc.garcia@uwi.edu. Please, please, please. Let's commit to bringing this to a common of SoTL, to a community of practitioners. Hope you enjoyed it, and we look forward to what is to come.
Thanks very much. Thoroughly enjoyed. Have a good day, everyone.